Hello, and welcome to the Power Skills Project from Assembleyou, the podcast designed to help you develop the power skills you need to succeed in your career and life. Once again, Adam here is your guide, and today I'm joined by John Baxter, who is here to talk to us about alignment. John has been passionately leading change in the UK for strategic partnerships for the past 4 years, since recognizing the gap between where most organizations currently work at and where they want to be. He's created the proprietary SDBP certificate and training program and has led the Strategic IT Partner Forum, a biannual conference that provides thought leadership, CXO level insight, and practical application to delegates in the UK. John conducts research and regularly writes about strategic partnering, especially in the context of digital transformation, and he has a top-tier global corporate client list who subscribes to his coaching and workshops. John, it is a real pleasure to have you join us today. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Cool. So I normally like to kick off with a bit of context for these sessions. So can we start by just going through what we mean by alignment in the case of relationship management in particular?
Yeah, okay. So relationship management, I like to see as a bridge. We don't build bridges for no reason. Bridges have a purpose, and it's to get to the other side, typically. So bridges have traffic going typically in both directions. So what does that mean in the real world then? If I'm having a conversation with somebody, there's typically a purpose to that conversation. Both parties want something from that conversation, some information, some insight, something that helps them make a decision. Now, in the context of that conversation, relationship management is all about enabling that traffic to flow freely so that it can get to the other side. That's information. And if the experience whilst having that transaction, that conversation is good, people feel at ease, people are prepared to share, they're relaxed and enjoy the interaction, then we can consider having a good conversation. And if you have many conversations, you could say, well, we have a good relationship. And if you were to say, okay, I'm a business person, I have metrics, show me a good metric where I have a good quality relationship. Well, I use proxies to demonstrate that. And if I've got their mobile phone number, if people feel comfortable me ringing them up whenever, for example, if people, when I ask them to have some time in their diary, then they make space for it in their busy schedule, then I know that the other person sees value, the information I give and the insights I provide them with, you see. So a good quality relationship. Going back to the bridge metaphor, alignment. So imagine you've got traffic on the bridge and it's going in both directions. If there was no traffic control, then obviously it would be a massive crash in the middle and nobody would be able to get to the other side. So the point is we have to have traffic lanes, alignment to do that. Okay, so what does that mean in practice then? Well, it means that when we're having a conversation, we're on the same page, figuratively and literally speaking. So we're sharing the same idea and our understanding of that idea is the same as the other person who's interacting with us, you see. So it could be a sales pitch. It could be a problem or an issue where at work we're having to solicit resources or get people to get involved and support our case, for example. So alignment becomes very important in, first of all, understanding what the situation actually is. And quite often, if we don't have that, any subsequent conversation or delving deeper into that is a setup for failure because we're not on the same page. We don't have the right situational awareness, the context. We've got a war in Ukraine at the moment. So the fog of war. I mean, if we don't know where our soldiers are, where the enemy is, where the defenses are, that situational awareness, then we're in trouble. So whatever tactics we might employ to achieve our goals could be misplaced and not achieve those goals simply because we don't have sufficient awareness of what we're talking about. Alignment for me is making sure we're on the same page and we go through a process to establish and we make sure that the other person is on the same page with us. So there's a variety of techniques to ensure that we know that they know we know, if you see what I'm saying.
I do, yeah. And the one thing that strikes me as you're kind of talking through this is alignment is it's one of those power skills or soft skills that sits behind so many of our business interactions. So, and you gave us a few examples there. So, a sales pitch, if that's misaligned, you're wasting your time and you're not going to get any kind of positive outcome there. Engaging internal stakeholders to push a new incentive through or to get different people on board in the company. Again, alignment because it needs to align with their needs. Partnerships as well is just like such an obvious one. And I think that's probably where you do quite a lot of work is how do you align with other companies to either go in for joint ventures or resell or promote each other's products or however it is. But that alignment needs to be spot on. Otherwise, one side is feeling like they're in a traffic jam and the other's kind of free flowing, I guess. It's, yeah, to use your
Exactly. Yeah.
bridge analogy.
A one-way street.
Yeah, which is not what you want in any of
Mm,
these scenarios, especially when you're selling something. You need to,
exactly.
the
Yeah.
person buying needs to be getting as much benefit or more than you are from selling it. That's the
Yeah.
whole idea.
Yeah. So the fundamentally important, as you say, in terms of the almost every conversation we have is a process of alignment. And we're going from something which is foggy, unclear, to something which is more clear and explicit. So the purpose of alignment is fundamentally to get rid of the fog and gain clarity, really. And it's an iterative process. So there has to be some kind of feedback. So when we're having a conversation, pausing, letting other people reflect back on what you've just said is actually very important. So a question often is not an excuse to force down other people's throats your opinion. It's actually a time for reflection and to say, okay, I may not be so sure about that. Help me understand a bit better, or why should we be doing this? So these are fundamental questions that if you don't allow the space for in the conversation to manifest, then you're going to go from one situation of fogginess to another situation of fogginess, and you're just going to go round and round in circles. So to get clarity is fundamental.
And is it your recommendation or do you advise businesses and individuals to work on that as early as possible?
I think I'm speaking specifically to conversation technique, really. And very simply, it's all about listening and providing space for people to ask questions. And people respond in different ways. If you don't give them the space to respond, you'll never know what they're actually thinking. So you need to know what they're thinking in order to get alignment. So they have to say something. And you have to check that there is alignment, that we are literally on the same page. So you have to ask them, so what do you think? And quite often, when we're emotionally engaged in the topic, there's a bit of a crisis, we're all in a rush. Oh, I had to tell you this, or I have to get, so I've only got a short amount of time. Those are little minds which kind of explode later on because you haven't given sufficient space for the problem to percolate in people's brains. And so they may go off on a different tangent, they may get the wrong end of the stick, and they'll go off in a different direction from what you wanted, which isn't. So you just wasted what precious amount of time you have had with them. So that's one thing. And I have spoken about this iterative process. So it is a conversation. It is a two-way street. There's this mode of reflection, asking for feedback, getting their buy-in. And quite often you have to ask them, do you support this? Often reading the way they respond is as important as the words they say, because the English very often, they hate offending people. So whilst they may say something which is polite and nice, it might actually mean something far more lukewarm and less committal than saying, yes, isn't that a wonderful idea? Yeah.
How do you unearth when someone is maybe just being polite? It's a very British problem, I find, when we're dealing with, or North America, for example, and they tend to be straighter shooters in that if it's not for them for any reason, they'll tell you straight away. And that's that. Whereas in the UK in particular, we'll get a lot of, I really like this idea. And then you don't then get the support from them one way or another because actually they're just saying that to be nice rather than what they really think. So how do you unpick that, or I guess draw that out of somebody in a way that makes them doesn't put them in an uncomfortable position, because again that's important, but gets to the crux of the issue.
Exactly. So this is where getting to know people is fundamentally important, because we British camouflage our true intent more so than other nationalities. That we have to get to know ourselves far better. So if you're raised in the UK, you'll automatically recognize certain phrases as being non-committal, whereas a non-UK raised person would automatically take away the literal sense of the sentence. So
Yeah.
getting to understanding the culture takes years, unfortunately. And secondly, even within that, it takes me a good few months of interactions with people to gauge how they respond to specific, what triggers them, and what actually the signs that, and you have to watch people and listen to people a lot. So if you were to sort of say the same thing to 10 different people, you'd probably get 10 different reactions. Acknowledging what those different reactions are and understanding people's agenda behind the scenes will help you correlate, join the dots between, okay, so that person said that, and he said it in that inflection, with tone of voice and raised eyebrows and all the rest of it. And it gives you a sense of how committed they are. And if you know that person, what their interests are, what their personal agenda is, then you can start to gauge their level of commitment to whatever initiative you're proposing or crisis that is before them at that time. So the soft skills element, the whole package, is really key to going beyond the question, are you aligned with this? They may say yes, and they've no idea what they're aligned to at all.
Yeah.
So, situational context, understanding the personality, the culture, all part of the soft skills baggage, helps get that sense of commitment or not commitment. I have mentioned the personal agenda there, and it's only in times of crisis I find that you do see people act to their true personality, their not so corporate, idealized persona they project in the workplace. When people are under pressure, when they're under stress, I'm talking about myself. I know how I act under stress. I act more John Baxter than whatever corporate persona, professional image that I would like to project. Am I as calm and composed in all circumstances? It's something I constantly practice because it benefits other people and the conversations I have. Yeah. The true point is that once we understand that personality, the agendas they have at work, their goals, are those goals aligned with that of the organization, or are they purely self seeking at the expense of other team members, for example, is only revealed when there's crises occur. So it's a good thing we have crises because we demask people's true intent.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a difficult game to play.
Yeah, no, definitely. And so we're talking about a very nuanced skill here, aren't we? And one that you can work on. So just from some of the notes, it's about asking the right questions. It's about listening and trying to uncover. It's about understanding some of the background of the people you're or persons that you're talking to as well, where they're coming from, and trying to get that kind of context. It's body language, it's face expressions, it's everything. And it's a very iterative process. So it's something that you work on. So I'm guessing the more time and exposure you have to people, be it conversations, Zoom calls, in person, the better you're going to A, understand that person, and B, gather more of that context and build that deeper relationship, and also develop that trust that I guess is needed for them to say, you know what, Adam, this isn't quite right for us, or I don't like this because of this and this. And then have the opportunity to then get back to a place where you can realign rather than being politely off kilter with each other.
I love that expression, politely off kilter. Yeah, it's all about building bridges, isn't it? The more you know the person, the bigger the bridge you've built, and the more traffic you can transact across that bridge. There are some aspects to alignment that help, almost like a checkbox exercise you can go through. And this is what I've found useful in a everyday context. in terms of before I speak to a person, I need to be very clear in my mind of what is the outcome I'm wanting to achieve in terms of the conversation, firstly. And then secondly, we've spoken about this situational awareness. If I am to talk about this outcome, this value proposition, this pitch, crisis, problem, can we agree on the facts? And that, as a question like that, can we agree on the facts? What are the facts of the case? And what the different, because without establishing that, then we're talking about opinions. And opinions are great, and it's revealing of how people think and their position on the continuum of whatever outcome we're wanting. But the facts that need to be established, the concrete evidence, so to speak. The other aspects is all about values, and this is where this esoteric, ethereal idea of what we have on the company website comes into play. If we have 5 or 6 values, trust, transparency, that kind of thing. What's important to us? How do we operate? And quite often especially when we sense that people may be seeking their own personal agenda at the expense of team members or the greater good, so to speak, in the broader business context, those values and principles actually become very important, because we might need to remind people of that. What we expect in how we work together is the fact that we're transparent, we share information so that we can all have that insight to make the right decisions on something. So values and principles, understanding what they are and agreeing to them as well. We might find out that whilst we may nod our heads to the typical corporate 5 values, that in practice, we don't care about them, and so long as nobody's watching, we'll do our own thing. So getting that sense of commitment to the principles and values is hugely important, and that kind of really defines the culture of the organization as well. So you can see how culture, personalities, and values, there's an interrelationship, and it needs to be worked on. It doesn't have to manifest itself in a conversation. So if we know we've already established the values and principles, and we're all on that same hymn sheet, we don't have to argue about that. But if there's a problem there, then it's not going to help us achieve our outcome further down the line, really. And then the last thing is the approach. And so long as we're aware of the situation and agree with them, the values and the outcomes that we're both trying to achieve and agree towards, then a lot of the time is how are we going to do this? How are we going to crack this egg, basically?
How do we make this work for all the interested parties effectively? Very cool. Great. Is that a particular model or template that you use for that?
Absolutely, yeah. So I just highlighted those 4 checklist items, so to speak. Do we agree? And I've got a little kind of giveaway presentation that people can share and use. So it's something I hope is sufficiently simple that you can keep it in mind when you're having that conversation. So it's not an Excel spreadsheet you have to fill out every time you go and have a conversation. It's just an aid memoir to sort of say, are we aligned on this? Our values, principles, outcomes, situational awareness, delivery approach. Where are we going to be spending our time today discussing? What are the roadblocks that we need to get out of the way?
And I guess if you're going into a meeting or a kind of a situation where some of those issues might be, you can prep and adjust and actually address those first, instead of spending most of the meeting talking in a misaligned way before getting nowhere by the end of it, which I'm sure we've all been in meetings like that. I 100% have, when it's been 50 minutes of people talking in basically at odds, and then in the last 5 minutes someone brings it all together and be like, oh, that makes sense now. If we'd have known that 50 minutes ago, we could have had a really good productive meeting. Now we've got to have another one because actually that was just a bit of a waste of time.
That is it. And it can often be a messy process because we don't know what we don't know sometimes. Sometimes you think you go into the meeting and then, actually, you only find out halfway through there's a new piece of information because somebody just happened to ask a question on the off chance. And then, unbeknownst to the rest of the people, that was actually the crucial piece of information that we all needed. Yeah, it can be messy, but applying that framework actually speeds up the amount of iteration, or reduces the amount of iteration, and gets to the value quicker. So hopefully, if people know or can at least identify where the gaps are, if we're having a conversation during that meeting, and 10 minutes in, we're thinking we're going around in circles on one particular element. Why is that? We can ask the question. We seem to be going around in circles on this. What is it? And then we can bring in the checklist. Is it values? Is it situation? Is it the facts? Are we talking about the same outcomes here? Do we agree or disagree, or do we have different interpretation? Absolutely. So we can also almost do a rain check on the progress of the meeting. Say, what's stopping us here? Is it those 4 elements, really?
Brilliant. We can link to that download in the show notes. Is it available on your site, John? Is that right?
No, this is something I've prepared specially for this podcast.
Cool. Brilliant. Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll make sure we put a link to that in the show notes.
Yeah.
So do download that if you're listening. Next time you find yourself in one of those meetings, take that internal checklist and run through it, because it's going to be one of those things for sure. Fantastic. So that's some really good tips on how to achieve alignment, which was one of the questions I was going to ask you, but we've already covered it. Next, what I wanted to look at is bring this to life in a couple of real examples or stories of where this kind of thing has happened. And again, this can be where alignment was achieved or was not achieved, or any interesting tales from your experiences doing this or helping companies and organizations align themselves better.
There's a specific example which had a big impact on one particular organization. And for a whole variety of reasons, one department viewed the other department as ineffective. So both departments saw each other as the enemy, really.
It wasn't sales and marketing, was it? Because I've been in organizations many times and it's always sales and marketing that don't use.
So this is, it can be any department. And in fact, any people will be going around thinking, there's these specific teams which just don't seem to get on, really. And what was going on here was that, first of all, there was a lack of respect. And there was a big gap in expectations. So one department expected that this other department should perform to their expectations. Whereas the other department said, oh no, we've got our expectations. We expect you to perform to what we think you should do. And that was the thing, right? You should be doing this, okay? If you do this, therefore, we think you are good. If you do not do this, we think you are bad. And by the way, we think you are bad at the moment, therefore no respect. And until you do these things, then it's the communication, the relationship was very poor, the dynamic. So there's a lot of ego play. And really it's saying, okay, let's understand that different teams have different needs. Let's establish what they are. And in this particular case, it was the marketing department. And they basically wanted to deliver a marketing plan, but needed business case approval for it. That is the biggest concern they had, and they needed help doing it. So the other department said, that plan's rubbish, and we're not going to help you until you come up with a better plan. Which is a little bit, who's the actual marketing here? Is it the marketing department or is it this other department? So this other department wouldn't come down from their tree. So the way I approached this was to say, look, it's important. We obviously need a marketing plan. We do need approval to deliver the marketing plans. Let's help them do that. No, so I'm the representative of that department, the enemy, so to speak. And so I said, okay, let's sit down together and we'll come up with a plan. What do you want? And it was effectively a listening exercise. So I didn't go in saying you have to perform the plan to these sets of standards. We'll come up with our plan in whatever shape, and I'll use my toolbox to add in the elements where probably there's bits missing, which if added together would be sufficient to put a business case to get approval. And that's exactly what happened. So the part of this process in terms of getting a plan together was to say, what are the projects to be part of it? So there's a portfolio of projects, there's about 6 or 7 of them. And my role was to figure out the different technology components that would enable the marketing deliverables to happen. You see, for example, if you want to do an outbound sales marketing campaign, it's going to use email. You need an email managing tool system. So the question is, do you use something out of off-the-shelf software as a service? Do you use something internal? Do you leverage an existing platform we've got? So those kind of questions I help answer. But it was to establish, we're going to be using email. We're going to be sending it out. Okay, tick. When do you want that happening? Okay, I want it in the first quarter. Okay, if you're wanting these 4 other projects in the first quarter as well, and we can only do one project, which project is it going to be? So in that scenario, we've already got beyond the point of situational awareness. We understood the facts. And now it was a process of alignment, prioritization to say, okay, the fact is we've only got capacity to do one project. Now we need to schedule it with reference to the capacity we've got. Or do you have the money to expand the capacity so we can do more projects at once, so on and so forth. So getting the clarity around the plan, then understanding the limits to that plan to make it work, then having an adult conversation about prioritization. And the outcome was very simple. We've got to deliver a marketing plan. Okay. And we managed to come up with a plan that would span the whole year, would deliver the marketing outcomes that they wanted, but in a way that it wouldn't tie up the IT department in knots for and cause huge blowout stress subsequently. So, there's a delivery approach there, because do we use the IT department, or do we use an outsourced service, or can we use resources that exist already in the marketing team? So once trust had been established, they revealed to us we already have an email service which we're paying for separately. It's not part of the IT budget. It's building up that relationship, the iterative process, to then find out, okay, so we've got all the cards on the table now. We've now got a series of options that we can choose from. Let's have a conversation of what's feasible and realistically possible, and then agree the plan, present it to the board. The board approved it. Then it was a question of execution. So all of that iterative process, getting out of our tree, not getting too egotistical about it, empathizing with the other party, recognizing what the actual situation was, understanding what was important. It was to get something done, and then deciding in the plan with all the facts on the table, how we're going to do this. So in a nutshell, that was the alignment paradigm I use.
Yeah,
How's
brilliant. Yeah, great example. Really good. I'm sure one that a lot of people listening will be able to relate to and empathize with, having probably been on the receiving end of one of those kind of teams in the past. I think it's difficult to have worked in a workplace without there being some kind of friction between different departments. And yeah, that's an ongoing thing. John, out of interest, in terms of your work and how you help other businesses, are you mostly helping with that kind of internal alignment, or are you doing more external alignment, so to speak?
that? Okay, as in my work. Okay, so there's two elements to this. I do often fixed term contracts working for companies. So typically what I do is I help other teams become better at partnering using tools like what I've talked about today. Other times I do short-term consultancy gigs or training. The training I do now is of a specific format. So I've digitized all of the content in terms of video so people can subscribe to the online training. And then, should they so wish, they can upgrade to a coaching package. So you get the video training out of the way, and then we discuss people's issues at work and how they can apply the training into their specific workplace. So the less people are on it actually is better for them, because one-to-one coaching is better than 1-to-6. I don't do groups more than 6 at a time, because then the value of the coaching kind of gets too diffuse in one sense. And the benefit with coaching is that people meet other people from different organizations and they share experiences. And because it's not necessarily people they're directly working with, they actually feel more open about, they're not going to get themselves into trouble. So that's where they get the certificate you spoke about at the beginning. It's through the coaching program. The training itself is relationship management or value management or whatever. But say you've been through the coaching and done the exams, then you get the certificate.
It's a lot less political if you're dealing with people outside your organization, and you're not going to end up with, I guess, someone in a different department's boss in there that then you feel difficult to speak the truth. So that sounds brilliant. So we're talking coaching, we've got the online stuff as well, and also going in and actually helping businesses with their various alignment issues.
Yes. And typically contracts around 18 months work. If, say, we all do relationship management, all right, already, implicitly. Some people seem to adopt it as a full-time role. That's fine, but we can all become better at it. And to enable the full suite of kind of activities to get all the traffic flowing freely across the bridge and get the teams working well together, I'd say is about 18 months in terms of a program of work. If you're, depending on the level of maturity the organization is already at.
What you're talking about there is quite a big change process, isn't it? Because you don't just want to put a band-aid or a plaster on these issues. You need to get in there and systemically change how people communicate with each other in order to get to that alignment and get to those better results. So John, obviously you help organizations do that. What would be your like 1 or 2 tips if, say, leadership or MD or CEO at a company that has 100 people, we've got different departments, we've got these kind of growing pains. and you're starting to identify them, what should they be thinking about doing right now if they can see that there is misalignment happening? Is there one or two things you think, right, if you catch that early, you're going to really help? And I appreciate I'm probably asking for a silver bullet in what is quite a complex
Yeah.
solution.
I think it's helping everybody understand that this is a shared issue, I think. So if people within the teams can recognize there's a problem, I think that's the first major step. Because after that, gaining energy and momentum to actually do something about it would be far easier. So if you're the leader saying, you have alignment issues, it's probably not going to work. But I think we need to demonstrate through examples of how things aren't working in the organization to say, there's a case, we could be doing things better. Does anybody have any ideas on how we could do this? And at that point, people say, yeah, oh gosh, this is terrible. We do absolutely need to do something about it. And there's at least a modicum of consensus. Then we can use that and orchestrate it and build energy behind it to get the momentum needed to put in place a change program.
So reflection is a good place to start. Look inwards or look at what's happening.
Yeah, you don't want to manufacture a crisis, but if people can recognize there's a big issue and it's affecting them specifically, and they can see the benefit in changing the way they work, then that persuasion exercise is already half done, I would say.
Brilliant. Fantastic. So great advice. And thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. I think we've got some really brilliant tips in there of how people can take control of this and help think about alignment in their own meetings and the meetings of their teams and organizations in particular. We're going to put a link to that free resource that John mentioned in the show notes. You can also find out more at baxterthompson.com. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah, fantastic. And we'll also put John's LinkedIn link in the show notes as well. So is that the best place to get hold of you, John, on LinkedIn? Or
LinkedIn is pretty much the go-to. Yeah, and baxterthompson.com will redirect to the online coaching service I provide.
Brilliant. Cool. So that's where to go to find out more about John. John, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciated you coming on here and sharing your expertise. And we'll be back very soon in 2 weeks with another episode of the Power Skills Project. And we look forward to seeing you all there. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.